if an innovation or new technology has clear overwhelming benefits and advantages, we shouldn't be killing it completely just because, well, it has this little thing here. If it does not have overwhelming benefits and just creates new risks, well, there's a good reason to maybe say, no, I'm not so keen about it, let's experiment in a small corner, but not do more. So I think really risk-based and risk proportionate mean we accept risk, we know there's risk in everything, and we're going to get the overall effect in that.
Thank you. So evident into my question. So I expect some more harsh questions from the audience. So please, the mic is coming.
Thank you very much. I just like very much your reference to the kindergarten, because I can add something to this discussion from my traveling long time ago to Israel, when they have a very interesting model for kindergarten. They have risks in kindergarten, and they, on purpose, they put all kinds of risks. But, of course, the baby doesn't have the risk of a 2-year-old child, and the 4-year-old child doesn't have the risk. So they build on the risks, and every time when a child is getting older, for instance, a 4-year-old child gets a radio, and he can put it apart, but not for a 2-year-old child, because he put it in his mouth. So I want to say with this that there are, of course, like Florentin said, everything is risky, but it's also not risky in all situations and for all people in the same manner. So you can provide a sort of system, and I've heard this morning already, with a wider focus on talking with people and making people talk what they think is acceptable, and also, of course, political decisions. The weight of this risk is not the same as the weight of the other risk.
Thank you. Some more remarks or questions? Yeah, please. If you will introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Ida. I get an impression that, as Giedrė said, we have a problem with the data from different municipalities coming and organizations. So I get the impression that the first biggest problem is that they don't share data, and when we don't have information, we repeat old mistakes and trying to over-regulate because we don't have a database where to look at how others dealt with maybe the same problems or in kind of the same way. And the question is, why don't we set priorities for sharing data first, so we can try to, improve making regulations later. But if we have data, that will, just help us.
Yeah. Data, we all talk about data, but we're definitely not always getting the right data and enough data. So some thoughts about how to get better and more using data. Who wants to?
Yeah, since I was kind of mentioned, this pressure from the start. The availability of data from other institutions is just part of the problem. There is a lot of data inside institutions that is underused, and I think this is a primary issue, because when institutions understand that the internal data that they have is of value, there is more demand from data from other institutions. Because I've met so many times people asking other institutions, please give us that set of data, or without actually knowing how to use it and without actually using the data that they have internally. And I think this is, you need to start from internal data, make full use of it and then look for data in other institutions.
I will jump in if you allow. Unfortunately, the Minister of Environment had to leave, but we had some joint ventures and projects related to data, especially the open data. And open data is not so fashionable now as it was like 10 years ago. It looks like this, but I still think this is a very important tool. Because, you know, I have a feeling when we're leading big organizations that sometimes people avoid actually to show up, to open up internal data because they think that somebody else will attack them when using this data. But in fact, what happens that typically when you govern a big organization, it's so difficult for you to understand what's happening inside, not for others. And when you open up data, somebody is suddenly collecting it and organizing it, and it's you who benefit and get from this data most, but not others. So I still believe that open data is important, and I think one more check is very important, that the fact that somebody is not providing data, providing wrong data, is also a piece of data. And then you make it public. This is quite an influential tool, I must say. That if you would say that Lithuania would have 60 municipalities and 40 provide data and 20 not, just make a list of those 20. And you will see that out of this 20, you will get just 5 in the course of several months, at least in many cases. So that's my insight. But if you want to jump in on this data, yeah, go.
Yeah, I wanted to react a bit on what you said, and I think you're really right with that. Many times we think about the ideal of data that we should be having, right, in a perfect world, and we underestimate the data or the information that is already there, but also the information that can be got in other ways, right? So sources of data are also sharing data with other authorities. I know that in some countries it can be difficult because of interpretation of data protection regulation. But I mean, data are everywhere. So for example, in the project we just finished in Italy, the support that the OECD provided helped licensing authorities find businesses that didn't have an authorization, a license, smaller businesses, with information that is available on the web. So basically with some techniques, not also very expensive, etc. I mean, the information is there, right? We need to find, or also an OECD project in Italy, and this is work that was already done in the US and in several countries. The team supported the authorities basically looking into social media for some information on food poisoning or hygiene, etc. Right? So it is about also finding maybe information somewhere else. I mean, somewhere else in a place that where we can have it.
Thank you. We have one question. Councillor, please.
But I noticed I had one word to say. Just my one word is indeed. Gidus spoke about the different levels and the need to have more interface between local and whatever central levels of government. This is a very common problem, and this is sometimes linked to privacy or interpretation, etc. This is one we should definitely address.
Yes, I wanted to add that digitalization also facilitates access to data. It can be useful for bridging these different layers. And also creativity that you mentioned is true. For instance, with COVID spread, GRC colleagues devised a method on monitoring sewage waters to really monitor the spread of COVID, which was very effective. So you didn't need to rely on really collecting as surveys information, you could just measure it. So science is at your disposal, technology advances, all the regulations on transparency, open data, interoperability of data, and also portability of data, they help. And I can see in my 30 years of working with data that there is improved evidence and disposal of policy making.
Just to add one sentence, what you told that this GDPR issues, we may say that it's something to protection, but the fact is very clear that in all countries people are so afraid to make some mistakes in this case because the fines are so harsh that of course it affects their behavior in sharing data both for public and private. This is the fact. This is the risk they know they're taking when sharing data, and some of them are not willing to take this risk. Sharing the data because some name could be not left in this data set, and that would be a problem for them. So it's an issue. So please, Councillor.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you for interesting discussion. And maybe it's a little bit selfish, but you usually look for something what's important for you when you participate in such events. Remigius is right saying that for decades we've been creating kind of regulatory friendly, I should say, culture. But at the same time, we always indicate the importance of deregulation, of indicating clearly. And it happens for years already, and it's a little bit frightening to see that some things started already in 1975. So I think that now we are facing this problem of regulation, and I should say wise regulation, and how to cope with this burden of regulatory acts without making additional regulations. Because in case we say, for example, as you indicated, that you will, OECD will review licensing and permit system, issuing new recommendations, we have already led the red light that again, new recommendations, new regulations. It's the same for the EU documents, as Marcus Weishaber also indicated. So, philosophical question: how in this condition, in this environment, to create culture where we are not afraid of deregulating, where we facing quite wisely all regulation, all this diminishing of administrative burden. So I just want to know your opinion, and maybe you have your recipes, because you know a lot of countries, you know a lot of examples. So how other countries deal with this issue?
Yeah, thank you for this question. Very, very good question, and we are approaching to the end. And actually, if you will allow, I would also say, this is like two elephants in the room here. Also, one is called Dodge, and another one in the United States, so because they are doing a lot of this, good and bad or whatever. And another is European Union initiatives, like simplification initiatives and so on, which is like business as usual, but not completely as usual. So, and again, the stories you ask for from other places, what the deal, and the lessons to be learned for the sake, the final words and answering this question. So, please maybe if I could start with you as the starter.
Thank you, if you don't mind, indeed. So I think, I don't think Dodge is about deregulation at all. I think Dodge is about the destruction of the US government, and it is proceeding a little bit too fast for comfort. So that's been my, unknown, unpredictable risk, because we don't even know what could be the result. But seriously, yes, there are a lot of things you can do. And one, just catching on the last thing on privacy just before. The problem largely in GDPR is not so much maybe the regulation itself. It could be improved, etc. But it is very much structured in regulate, adopt norms, observe, punish. there's very little of a delivery instrument which would be provide guidance, provide advice, provide simple tools, say, look, this is what we really expect, this is how to solve it, no, this is not really a problem, or yes, this is really a problem, etc. I'm not going to blame the European Union or European Commission on them, because it was always the co-legislators, meaning the member states. And the member states often don't like to delegate powers on this, etc. And then after they complain, you know, so in Europe it's a complicated thing about it. But to answer your question more broadly, we know that a lot of regulatory burden does not help the regulatory objectives. These are two different things. This is why I don't like the deregulatory crazy people, because they end up being against the objectives of, let's say, safety, protection, etc., and destroying everything and just creating chaos, which is not great, and not creating a level and fair environment. We can cut a lot of things on reporting, we can cut a lot of things on licensing, which Giuseppe was talking about, which is something I've been working on for years and years. And I still see countries where you have a license for everything that moves and a second license for things that don't move, and none of this creates anything, because you're like, well, so what? So the people who are lawful, law obedient, etc., they're going to get the license, and the really bad ones are not going to get it, and you don't even know they exist, right? So you should be trying to capture the entire thing. So we have examples of doing it better, we have examples of doing it less well, and it's really about cut the unnecessary paper, cut the unnecessary entry barriers, focus on advising and guidance, and then have really strategic, well-prioritized, well-targeted control. And if you do these four things, you end up in a place where your regulation is working, and where the burden you're creating is really minimal.
Thank you. Here's your answer and last words.
Yes, thank you very much. I have two parts to the answer. One is support better regulatory delivery, because it means if it functions properly, the more important provisions, the more important legal regulations that prevent real incidents and real risks are going to be taken care of, and some of the less important regulations are going to be put silently down. Let's say. And the second part of my answer is, I think that for better regulation, it would be great to have a plan of reviewing regulatory fields every 5 years. So, for example, Ministry of Economy and Innovation has 10 fields of regulation. 10 fields of regulation. And if there was a plan to review pieces or 2 fields of regulation, not laws, not single regulation, but fields of regulation. And if the government, the businesses, and the parliament had this plan in advance, telling, look, we will be doing public procurement in 2027, so now let's abstain from small changes and let's prepare. So I think that both for the quality and for the potential of deregulation, that slower pace with all parties preparing for that would be a good tool.
Thank you, Christian.
I also have 2 points to say on this. Maybe a bit different. One thing to keep in mind is interest groups like lobbyists, like general data protection regulations suffered a lot from interest groups actually making something, because intended only to regulate Google's life, to really make it impossible for everybody else, therefore sabotaging the spirit of what was regulated. The second thing is what we didn't touch on is fairness issue. So we talk about risk. So who is going to bear the risk? So this is also responsibility of the legislature. So yes, we have looked at the big picture and we have improved the effect.
Thank you.
I just want to add something from a legal perspective because I was a lawyer. I studied to be a lawyer. One of the issues is that many times when there are new regulations, they are done in addition and inside the scope. So I think that maybe one of the things is there is a word that before gave you said when he was making his presentation, which was courage. I think when there are new regulations, there needs to be courage in reviewing the stuff of the regulation for that thing. I mean, it's not useful to have, I don't know, which confuse people, etc. And also not to be in silo to things like the connection with the other regulations, with, I don't know, framework law, etc., etc. And this, I don't know, but this I find that is rarely done. And it is in a problem in countries where
next coffee break, so nothing for speakers. I think they're open and will answer your questions. Thank you so much for being such a great audience and speakers.
Thanks for being a great chair, really good. I have a couple of housekeeping announcements, as we used to say. First is you have nearly 20 minutes for the coffee break, and a couple of minutes shaved off, but it should be enough. The second, there were a lot of questions, for instance, about data, etc. Please don't forget we have a second day of the conference. It's a very good day. I'm always afraid that people come on the first and forget the second. We'll be talking quite a bit about this. There are going to be very practical examples, so be there tomorrow. The third is I'm just asking the speakers and the moderators, etc., of the first session to be here. We're just going to take a picture for a minute and then we can go for a coffee break. Thank you, everyone, and see you in less than 20 minutes.
So it's an honor having you here. Graham, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you for that kind introduction to Sephiroth. Obviously, I spent the time you introduced me trying to work out how to use the computer and even that is so thank you. It's a great privilege to be here this morning to speak to you. Thank you for that introduction. This is the first time I've been in Lithuania, which is a wonderful privilege for me, but I have been following the regulatory journey here through Vilnius in particular, and also other conversations for, I think, more than 10 years. And as Valentin said this morning, it's impressive to see the energy and the commitment that Lithuania has to regulatory reform, and often puts the rest of us to shame, I think. So it's great to actually be here and to speak to you. And this is an awfully impressive place to speak to you in, so thank you to those who've organised this morning and made it possible. I'm going to talk a little bit about public risk and how we regulate that, and particularly how we've done that in my organisation, the Office of Product Safety and Standards. And I'm going to use 2 case studies to try and explore that a little bit, and then finish with some themes that I hope will be useful to us as we go forward with various presentations this morning. So in 2018 I was asked to set up a product regulator in the UK, the first time that had happened. Previously products were regulated, particularly for product safety, by municipalities, where I've been working for 20 years and knew the problems of doing that at a very local level. So we tried to set that up at a national level. And there's immediately a challenge on the first line of that slide, which is that I'm responsible for the regulation of products and making sure that things that reach consumers and others are safe and do what they say they'll do and won't cause harm to the environment or to people. But my organisation is placed in the Ministry for Business and Trade, whose #1 commitment is to growth. So the initial conundrum right at the heart of my job is, am I a regulator trying to stop bad things happening, or am I a regulator trying to help good things happen in the form of growth? And that's a twin challenge that it seems to me that all regulators need to address, but we have that very firmly in our minds. And hopefully what I'm going to say this morning will help to illuminate how both of those are possible at the same time, but it's probably something we should come back to in our conversations. But one way of thinking about that, which encapsulates the first conversation, is that we can think about it all through the lens of risk. It's easy to think about the risk of things going wrong, the risk of people being harmed, but it's sometimes harder to think about the risk of good things not being achieved, be that growth or innovation, export, trade, things that we deal with in my department. Missing those is equally a risk. And so I would like to suggest to you that risk is a currency that can be used to compare both upside and downside activity. And that when we think of this conundrum of growth and regulation, we shouldn't think of them as binary alternatives, but we should think of them on the risk spectrum and think about how we can compare them and measure in that way and bring those things together. Prior to 2018, I've been working in regulatory delivery, as we started to call it. A colleague of mine, Chris Hodges, and I wrote a book around that time. Whether that was the first time anyone had written the words regulatory delivery, I don't know, but we decided it was our phrase, and we should have trademarked it. But regulatory delivery as a theme, alongside the long-standing theme of regulatory policy. Winston Churchill was quoted earlier by the Chancellor of the Ministry of Economy. I'm always happy to go anywhere where Winston Churchill is quoted, because in the UK we've been pursuing regulatory deregulation, bonfire of red tape, simplification since 1948. Now there aren't many people apart from Florentine here who were alive in 1948, but those of you that were here will remember the situation in those days. Well, we've been on a long journey. How many years is that? 60, 80 years. And so this regulatory policy, simplification, deregulation remains really important. But what we've come to see in recent years is it doesn't matter how good your laws are, or frankly how bad your laws are, you can really mess up if the inspection, the licensing, and all those things are not done well. So regulatory delivery, implementation is right at the heart of that. So I guess in 2018, what I was being asked to do was to see whether I could put my money where my mouth is. Could I actually do this thing that I've been talking about, or could I only talk about it? Well, we know I can talk about it, and since 2018, we've been testing that. And now, 7 years on, is a good time to reflect on whether we've made any progress in actually doing good regulatory delivery in this area of product regulation. When I was thinking about that, 7 years felt like quite a long time, and then I spoke to Kevin, who was telling me the HSE, Health and Safety Executive in the UK, was just celebrating its 50th birthday, and suddenly 7 years didn't seem too long, and it felt like I should give myself a bit of a break. But what's happened in 7 years? Well, we knew there were some challenges. We go back to Florentine's risks that are known and risks that are not expected. We knew that the UK had just made this bold decision to go independent as a global trading nation, and we're going to have to rewrite all our laws and change all our ways of practicing. We didn't know that we were about to enter into a major pandemic that would change not only the way we work, but also the parameters of how we work. And so this 7-year period has been very challenging for us as a regulator. And what I want to do in the two case studies I'm going to show you is try and demonstrate that actually the principles of risk-based regulation can be applied to challenging things that affect public risk. I'll leave it to you to assess that. But we have in the UK really come to quite a difficult set of realisations around regulation. We have had a number of regulatory failures that have been brought to the public gaze through public inquiries, in a way that probably wasn't the case, certainly in the UK and for many other countries prior to that. We've seen how regulatory failure, and I'll talk in a moment about a fire at a place called Grenfell Tower where 72 people lost their lives, but also we've seen in the Post Office Horizon scandal where people have been prosecuted, even when the evidence didn't support that, and we've seen in COVID real regulatory challenges around the way that we supply personal protective equipment and other products, and also the way that we regulated businesses through that period. We've seen that actually the way we regulate can fail. We talk about the UK as a sophisticated market economy, but we can get things wrong, and actually when we get those wrong, they have real implications for people. And it seems to me that learning from failure is just as important as learning from success. Now, I'm going to just use, as I say, a couple of examples to try and illuminate that. I won't stop on every slide because we are having a number of speakers and then also some discussion, but I'll try and just pick up the main points. So my first example of two is about baby self-feeding products. Now, I use this example because it's so extreme, but actually this applies to many products that are on the market nowadays. This example was brought to us actually by a municipal authority, a local authority, who had come across it, and also by a charity working in the UK. It's a product that I find quite astonishing. It's effectively a way of imprisoning your baby so that you can shove a bottle into its mouth and feed it without you having to be there because you've got all important things to do on social media, whatever it might be at the time. Now, all the experts tell me this is effectively a way of massively heightening the risk of your child dying. Babies are not designed to be fed by machine like this. They're designed to be fed by humans. They need the human interaction for psychological development. But more than that, actual physical safety, they need a person involved in giving the food, particularly that early under 6 months period. I became a grandparent exactly 6 months ago, so this has become rather more relevant to me. But actually, we should all know that. We should all know that babies are not designed to be shoved into something that traps their arms, bottles stuck into their mouth, and they're strapped there to be fed. So why does a product like that come onto the market? I worked for 20 years as a local authority trading standards officer. If I'd have found this on sale in the UK in those days, I'd have been horrified. So why is it on sale today, or why was it on sale today in the UK? Now, we've got people from many different countries in the room. I don't know whether these were on sale in Lithuania. I know they were on sale in Canada, and Canada banned them. I know they were on sale in Singapore. I don't know whether they were on sale in some of the other countries represented here today. But why did this product become available, and why was it being sold to consumers? And why were consumers who've always assumed that stuff they could buy was broadly safe, being exposed to this risk? We did a survey in the UK a few years ago where we said, do you think the amount of regulation you get is right? And the answer was yes. And then when we said why, it was because they believed the number of checks was completely different to the actual amount that goes on. We run a risk-based approach in the UK. We don't check every product. You don't have to have a certificate from my office before you put something on the market. And yet now we're seeing that those fundamental understandings of how things come to market are being changed. So what was going on here? Well, this was being sold not in high street shops but on the internet. It wasn't being sold by the platforms themselves, it was being sold by third-party suppliers. Who is responsible for those sales? And so we see these public risks being brought to market. Infant health, absolutely. Fatalities. Online distribution, who is responsible for the sale of those products in the country? Non-domestic actors, how do we enforce basic legislation when there's no one in the country taking responsibility for it? When our legislation had been designed and built for a completely different market, a completely different environment, where people knew who they were buying from, supply chains were short, and generally speaking, there was a physical interaction. Now, you can go onto the internet and you can communicate with somebody who is not only a long way away, but is completely unknown to you. There is no connection, apart from the fact that the online platform sorts and enables that interaction to occur. And so this isn't just around the product, it's also around the way that things are coming to the consumer. So what do we do as hopefully a fairly modern regulator? For each of the products that we could talk about, I'm just picking out two today, that there'll be a chain like this. And on the left-hand side, we will always have the same thing, which is risk assessment. I just said to you this was very obviously dangerous, but actually we should never say this is very obviously dangerous. How dangerous? Why is it dangerous? What's the risk assessment? What are the things that make it dangerous? What is the impact? What are the vulnerabilities of the people affected by it? Because risk assessment shouldn't just say everyone's the same. Risk assessment should look at the reality of the people who are receiving that product. So a really sophisticated, data-based risk assessment is critical. But then from there, once you've got your risk assessment, how are you going to act? What are the range of intervention choices that are going to make a difference? Now in this case, there's clearly issues around the supply chain. How are we going to intervene in that supply chain? How are we going to get the platforms to take this product off their websites? And more than that, how are we going to stop them doing things like this in the future? But also, how are we going to inform consumers? We managed a publicity campaign that reached over 1 million consumers by working with partners. We don't do very much ourselves, we tend to encourage other partners, trusted intermediaries, to deliver that message, but over 1 million people reacted to that. But then on the right-hand side of that, there will always need to be an enforcement component. Sometimes I think that people think that better regulation is about talking, communicating, writing, as if in some way that was instead of enforcement. There always needs to be a hard-edged enforcement. If people are prepared to put consumers' lives at risk in that way, there needs to be some consequence for that. Now, I mentioned my colleague Chris Hodges earlier, and he would say deterrent doesn't work. He would say deterrent doesn't change behaviour. I would say deterrent doesn't change behaviour on its own, but it's an important part of messaging. People need to understand that laws are there for a purpose, and if they break them, there will be consequence. I don't think that therefore changes behaviour. We saw an interesting slide earlier about what changes behaviour. You don't change behaviour just by having a big stick. then you do need to have the full range of measures. Now, I haven't got very long for my second example, so I'll whiz through the rest of this, but hopefully we can share these slides and you can look at them and how we approach some of that. All I will say about the lessons learned is this point on the right-hand side there. You need evidence, absolutely. You need engagement, you need to find out who the players are, whose behaviour you're trying to change. But you also do need that possibility or consequence of enforcement. My second example, very quickly, is from the area of construction products. One of the challenges that we faced when we were setting in 2018 to look at product safety was, it turns out there's a whole load of government trying to get someone to regulate and enforce their legislation for them. So we have doubled in size since then because of parts of government that would like us to do work for them. But one of the particular challenges was this terrible fire in the UK at a place called Grenfell. And 72 people lost their lives, but the way that happened was so significant for the public realm that we are continuing to learn the lessons from that even now. Because those 72 people didn't just lose their lives, they lost their lives in a situation where they had identified the risks they were facing and no one listened. They had shouted about the consequences of living in an unsafe building and no one listened. They shouted about the fact they couldn't get out and no one listened. Even during the fire, they were shouting through their telephones to the fire brigade control centre saying, can I get out? And they're being told, stay in your flat and you'll be safe, when clearly they weren't safe and they perished. The voice of the voiceless has never been brought to the public realm more clearly than happened in this event. And so we are trying to learn from that, we're trying to change the way that we work because of that. And one of the things that we're doing is we're trying to look at the products that caused that fire. Effectively, what happened was the fire started due to a fault in a white good fridge freezer, or associated with that fridge freezer in one flat. That fire should not have contaminated the whole building. There was a whole load of things that had happened, including the fact the building was covered in cladding, which, to quote one of the pieces of evidence given to the inquiry, was like cladding in petrol. It burned so fast and so out of control. Why was a building which was built in the 60s, but renewed in only about a few years before, in 2010, why was it covered in that product? Because, unfortunately, left to their own devices, businesses will not always do the right thing. Businesses will make short-term decisions. There's this marvellous phrase in construction, value engineering, which basically means how little can we achieve, how low can we drive the price and still get away with supposedly delivering the contract. And so people replaced flame-proof materials with non-flame-proof material, didn't do checks, didn't carry through those checks in practice. Is that a theoretical construct? No, it isn't, because the consequence of that was so many people lost their lives. And as I said in there, by no means a major consequence, but one of the consequences of that is loss of confidence in the public realm. Right at the beginning of this morning, we heard about the importance of trust. Without trust, regulation doesn't work, but also without trust, regulators can't do their work. And so destroying trust in the way that was achieved through this direct fire actually has really set back the cause of regulatory reform and regulatory delivery in the UK. And that's why I cite it as a risk. If we break those basic constructs, then we really do have some serious consequences. There's slides here about what's going on, why it happened, why it's still happening. This is an example from 2 years ago, a product that is not where it's supposed to be being sold for use in public buildings. Again, the same layout that I talked about before. The challenges of this particular product completely different from the challenges of making a self-feeding product. And yet, exactly the same disregard for consequence in all of that. Some lessons that we've learned, and then very finally, because I'm being shouted at from my right, what do we learn from all that? We learn that the credibility of regulators in very diverse markets is under threat. Each of the people in this room can talk about the importance of their regulatory field and the way in which demands are changing. IRIDE has talked about it. The way in which people are expecting more, quicker, faster, better. But actually we're not prepared necessarily to resource those things. Supply chain, my area is now products, but we could all talk about our supply chains. We have these incredibly short supply chains. Even while I was sitting here in the room this morning, if I wanted to, I could order a product which would be delivered to my house by tomorrow, possibly from anywhere in the world. Very short supply chains, and yet those supply chains actually are massively complex. It's just that we as consumers no longer see that. it's hidden away. So who is regulating that complex supply chain? We haven't talked very much yet about the application of data and the way in which data can be used because of the digital revolution. There's an interesting set of questions at the end of the last session, which I wanted to come in on the time and add. We are on the forefront, it seems to me, as regulators of completely reshaping the way that we use data to understand complex questions. AI gives the ability to manipulate data. We've always thought the problem was accessing data. I want to suggest actually the problem has always been manipulating data and using data, and we might be on the forefront of changing that. So we could talk from there about the big ambitions that we have as society, and not just my notes, which I haven't used. I could say a lot more, and I'm going to stop. Thank you very much. Looking forward to the conversation, and I really appreciate the chance to be here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ram. Our next speaker is Mr. Montarny, who is the Head of Risk Management at Sanofi. As you know, Sanofi is a leading global biopharma company with headquarters in Paris. So what he does, if I understand well, is to facilitate and ease the assessment of company risks and also monitor how response plans are designed. And also another thing about Mr. Montarny, he's an expert in regulatory compliance. So thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. And I would like to thank Florentin, who had the great idea of inviting me and the whole organization team. It's really a pleasure for me. I think we are at a pivotal moment for society and for risk in general. And it's great for me to be able to meet with so many talented regulatory experts and government officials. I will do my best to give you a flavor of what's my life, at least my professional life, and what enterprise risk management means in a big pharma company. But to begin with, I felt I needed to give you a few figures on what Sanofi is as a company, because it's not necessarily well known. Not only the company that we're to be, but also the transformation we are living through now. We have almost completed this transformation from a very diversified healthcare company to focused, innovative biopharma player with a portfolio of breakthrough medicines and vaccines, and we are specializing in immunology and vaccines. We are now the first biopharma company in the EU by revenue portfolio, which is 40 people. Working in Europe. We are present in many countries, and our key markets are the US, Europe, of course, and China. And we invest 7 billion every year on research and development. We are also an integrated manufacturer from the active pharmaceutical ingredient, drug substance, to final products, to distribution. And we have the ambition of becoming the first biopharma company to implement artificial intelligence at scale in everything we do. So as you can see, we're probably regulating in everything we do. So I would like to demystify what is enterprise risk management and what it means for a company like mine. We see it not as just a governance tool, but as a way to navigate the uncertainties of the ecosystem we are operating in, and trying to maximize the creation of value for the company and for the patients. We are a small team with no operational role, we're just a sounding board. We are having constant conversations with the top management, with the board of directors on risks. And we make sure that all levels of the company are assessing the risk in a similar way, so that we can really direct the management to take actions for the most important risks of the organization. And we are working together with other functions, in particular ethics and compliance, to disseminate the risk culture all across the company. Cultural aspects are very important sometimes. I describe myself as an organizational psychologist trying to remove the bias in the decision making when it comes to risk, because there are many. When we talk about risk, it becomes emotional, and sometimes it becomes difficult. So there is virtually, what kind of risk are we talking about? There is virtually no limit to the kind of risk that we can be covering. And I think we have a perfect mix of operational risk, compliance risk, ethics, financial, risk on people, risk on assets, and more we have strategic risk. And it's tricky to compare these risks because they are of very different nature. And the whole point is that we have to anyway, because we have limited resources and we need to invest in remediation for the risks that we're in. So in addition to this, the diversity of risk, the complexity of the nature of the risk, we have different time horizons coming into play. What is usually called risk, or for us active risk, where you have a reasonably good understanding of what the risk is. Either it's already there, or it can impact in 3-5 years maybe. And we have heat maps, we have risk owners, we have mitigation plans, the whole lot. Some of these risks may materialize, unfortunately, and turn into crisis for which we can activate business continuity plans. But our industry has a cycle time of 20 years. Strategic decisions that we take now will have an effect on our revenue and growth in maybe 10 years. All right? So we have to maintain a radar of emerging risks. Risk which can be slow, difficult to characterize, very uncertain, and we often do not know yet if the risk will materialize and if it will turn into a threat or an opportunity for us. So as a function, we help the management discuss as early as possible these emerging risks. And we are very happy when they decide to move it in active because it means that we are taking action. And it's very likely so that we will turn this risk into an opportunity. So the heart of the engine of risk management is this. It's called the risk profile, heat map. Our risks are assessed for their impact, the severity, the likelihood, of course, and then we have a third characteristic, which is the level of control that we assess. Okay, and when you look at the impact, the ERI function has been created at Sanofi 12 years ago. So now we have reasonable return experience. And from the beginning, we have decided that we will not only look at the impact of profitability and growth, but the business impact, we look at the impact on patients, employees, society at large, the environment, and our image and reputation, and we take the maximum of the different risks. Okay? So from the beginning, I would say the principle of double materiality was present when the function was created. It is our belief that in the long run, anyway, there is convergence between all these risks. You cannot have sustainable growth and profitability if you neglect your operating externalities. If you have a problem, you impact the environment, for example, it will impact your image, reputation, the goodwill, and ultimately the value of the company for various stakeholders. Okay? So when we have these risk positions, then we prioritize. So we look at the risks which are in the orange and red background, and for which we have a level of control which is weak or insufficient, and this is where we focus the management attention, because we need action, all right? And they are reviewed at the risk committee that I manage, at the executive committee at the quarter, and also we are presenting more and quite often to the board of directors. Okay. Now let's go out the animals of risk management. You have heard actually this morning about the black swans. It's very fashionable. But let's start with more simple ones. They are very well-known risks, and very common, where the biggest issue in my view is that we can learn to live with them and forget about them. And they become elephants in the room. So we need, of course, to keep the management on the hook. We need ownership, but we know this risk, we have expertise. Then we have the black jellyfish. They are well characterized, but they happen very rarely. Okay, that's for example, like heat maps, manufacturing sites stopping production. Okay, they're going to happen more, but still, it's rare. So the main issue here is that we need to build collective memory. We need not forget that they are going to happen. And then we have the non-obvious risk. So we have gray rhinos, okay, which have never happened before. We know they are likely to happen. It's quite probable, but we don't know when. We don't know. Like, of course, like the sudden escalation of tensions in Asia Pacific comes into this category. So we need scenarios for this. Because we really have no idea. We have never been through this. So we need scenarios. And then we finally have the black swans. So black swans is a paradox because everyone will tell you that they could have been predicted, but it's impossible to predict a black swan. Okay, for pharma, for example, a black swan would be a coordinated bioterrorist attack over several continents, leading to agencies taking control of biopharma assets, governments taking control. Right? Okay, this is predictable, right? But I have thousands of things. Why would I take this one in particular? So here, these black swans, we need more than scenarios. We need to be resilient, and we need to ensure agility. That's the only way. Resilience and agility. To be clear, I think that most of the risks that you are regulating, whether product safety, people safety, energy supply, in my company I consider them as relatively well controlled. Okay, I have to be cautious, because otherwise it's going to become an elephant in the room. Each of these risks is well known. We have tons of historical data to quantify the risk. There is a governance, we have emotional responsibilities, we have standards in place, we have external intelligence, we have continuous monitoring, we have alerts. We have built over time layers of controls following lines of assurance. And it's good to have control of the risk at the operational level, to have experts in functions to help the operational management, independent audits, and inspections from regulatory authorities, right? That's great. What I would like to advocate for is that we should always put full ownership on the first time. I've seen regulations which tend to deflect responsibility on the second line. And in my view, this is a mistake, because you introduce rigidity, you're creating silos. All dressed in the colors of the regular soda, and there were the production operators, and there were the ones with the diet soda, there were the quality diets. And when you discuss with operators, they say, oh, it's good because it's the way we can see them coming. It's exactly the kind of things we do not want to see. So at Sanofi, we would like to do everything to help operational management to understand and perform its duties. And one aspect of it is radical transparency within the company. And we have an application with AI where we share not only performance, but also problems. And we're able to do prospective. We can see the future. And we can nudge the management to take the right decision, taking into account all aspects of the problem. Right? So we have embarked in a journey to drastically simplify our systems. And systems that work, and I guess regulations that work, are just the same. They are principle-based more than rule-based. They rely on a clear understanding of the risk from the top management to the shop floor, on clear and simple rules, on carefully set controls that are really targeted to cover the actual risks. I will give you, before that, just two examples of regulations that are ongoing, which I think is, the first example is with the GPL. There is a possibility to have more flexibility, to have electronic leaflets with the product, and we can then have flexibility for packaging. And this is a great regulation because we win on everything. Because you have less waste, because you avoid many errors in packaging, because also you are a lot more flexible when there is a problem happening. We are a lot more resilient because we can reallocate dynamically products to where they are most needed in your knowledge way. Okay? An example of a regulation where I don't think we are where we should is titanium dioxide. It started by titanium dioxide can cause maybe cancer by inhalation in particle form, and then it snowballs into, let's ban it into all food, and then it gets to, okay, in pharma you have to substitute titanium dioxide that you use for the coating tablet and capsules, and which is actually protecting your product and involving the stability. Without clear concerns of health, we are at risk of just discontinuing 60 to 70% of our overdose medicines just for this, for the benefit of the middle class, which is, if not zero, at least negligible compared to the impact it will have. Lastly, on the call for partnership, I would like to give you an example. We can partner, and we are partnering with authorities and governments in our commercial activities, in our global less unit, which is no profit, no loss for low income countries, and with our humanitarian branch, which is a foundation task. I will just focus for the sake of time on the first one. Modulus are factories that we have built in France and in Singapore. And they are able to manufacture, they are fully digitalized, they are completely modular. They can manufacture 4 medicines and vaccines at the same time. And in a matter of days, we can change completely the production to adapt to a pandemic, to a pandemic situation. Okay. So this is an investment into the future, to innovate, defend the competitive of our industry, address healthcare unmet needs, and prepare for emerging risks. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I would like to give the floor to Mr. Ho. He's Senior Director for International Workplace Safety and Health with the Ministry of Manpower in Singapore. And he's also the Vice Dean of the Ministry of Manpower Academy, which serves to develop the competence of staff in the ministry, including enforcement officers. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, and I'd like to thank the organizer for inviting me here to share our Singapore experience in terms of managing workplace safety and health, occupational safety and health, right? And I will quickly go through it. I will cover a short bit about us and what's our strategy and how we rethink our enforcement effort, as well as what Vision Zero. I think earlier there was some mention about Vision Zero and how do we interpret Vision Zero from that aspect. So quickly about us. Now I'm from the Occupational Safety and Health Division, which is under the auspices of Ministry of Manpower in Singapore. So we regulate all the labor laws, right? We administer both the Workplace Safety and Health Act, which is the Occupational Safety and Health Act, as well as the Work Injury Compensation Act, right? Along with our WICA subsidiary legislation. Our vision is a healthy workforce in a safe workplace. That means if our workforce is healthy and working in a safe workplace, that's what we hope to achieve. Our mission is to prevent all work-related death, injury, and ill health. So this is a bit, sometimes aspirational, but a lot of people claim that it's too idealistic to enable, not able to achieve it. But we say first we must believe we can do it before we even start putting programs and work system to try to go towards that. So we are largely divided into three main areas. One is regulator, which I come from, and my base is all regulator. I've been doing regulation work for the last 43 years. The reason why they call me senior director is because I retired from the director post. So the next option is for senior director. Right. And we have an institute to provide all the information and insight, the data, churning out data for us to work on. And we set up a Workplace Safety and Health Council, which is basically an industry partner. The chair is from the industry. We have people from the academic, from the union, from the regulators, from the companies, employers itself. So this is where we work a lot with the industry, and they lead the programs and lead their whatever they need to do. And we actively engage them and seek consultation from them, which whatever policy we want to implement in relation to the workplace safety and health. So these are the three areas. So what's our enforcement strategy? First, we say targeting where it matters. It's a risk-based enforcement approach, meaning we look at the area where we pose the highest risk, giving us the most problem, and our inspection resources all channeled towards there. We focus on hotspot and a priority area. Our enforcement strategy is also about creating adequate deterrence. I mean, you are there not because you want to enforce, but really to send a signal to deter people from that and ensure no complacency as well. And the most important arm is the third level, which is sometimes people say these are not actually enforcement related, but to us it's very important. We leverage on the media and the public to create a multiplier effect. In other words, when we do enforcement, we don't only do it for one workplace. We create the media presence and the sending out information and to propagate the deterrence effect. So that is there. As earlier you mentioned, right, that deterrence is still important while we are willing to engage and promote this compliance. Now we start with intelligence gathering, right? Planning where to inspect based on ground sensing and data and identifying where the risk area. Then we proceed to inspection. Inspection is about to ensure compliance. But really, is compliance, is it good enough? Actually, it's not. Compliance is under law. As you know, every law that we generate is just a very basic requirement. Does it really prevent all the accidents in the workplace? No. But that is the minimum requirement. And monitoring poor performance of the company in terms of surveillance. And of course, we conduct our own investigation to find out the causes, more to get learning, identify area of weaknesses in our system itself, and how do we make improvement on that. So these are our levers. Now, just a quick understanding of law enforcement. This under the Oxford say the act of compelling observance or compliance with a rule, law, or obligation. So, but usually when we talk about compliance, we talk about the benefits of non-compliance should be less than the cost of non-compliance itself. In other words, people take risks for complying, for non-complying, because they find that if I don't comply, if I get caught, I only get penalized so much. So whatever penalty we put in there must be higher than the cost of the non-compliance. So our regulator is able to adjust the cost of non-compliance to shape behavior of the regulator by increasing monitoring, we impose costs, as well as the administrative penalties as well. So this is how we look at this thing. And this is the articulation of how the economic framework for regulatory enforcement, how we pack the penalty system such that it acts as an effective deterrent for people, for companies not to do that. Now, that was something we have been doing, but we started to rethink about how we should enforce based on those things that we have. Necessary, but is there any other things that we can do to ensure not only compliance, but to do better than compliance? So we usually we go by punishing non-compliance, moving it towards the workplaces to improve their compliance, and workplaces to improve workplace safety health standards. So workplaces will improve their WSH compliance due to the sanctions and punishment meted out by MOM, question mark, right? Improvement in workplace safety compliance is equivalent to leads to improvement in WSH standards, question mark. Earlier there was a presentation that the answer is no, right? It's not good enough. So this is something that we must challenge the assumptions of regulators in terms of implementing the law. So remembering the end goal, we started with raising awareness, reactive, compliant, centric. Then we try to encourage people to do more proactive and self-regulate. But really, if you want to have something that is really achieving the outcome that we put the law in place, it must go beyond regulation. Because regulation can only do so much. But if you really want to achieve the outcome, it should go beyond the regulation. Don't talk about regulation. In my personal experience, when I first started work as a labor inspector, ops inspector, I go down to inspect workplaces and I spot something. The argument is always, is there a law that I need to comply with? Then of course I have to cite the law and say, if you don't do it, you get penalty. But today, our workplaces, wherever I go, then of course there's still some culprit come there. But the tendency is that, okay, how do we make it safe? Can we discuss about how do we make it safe? And this approach and rethinking about going beyond regulation is something we're trying to engage our industry, right? So this is the holistic enforcement strategy. If you don't have the capability and attitude is poor, we reactive, tend to do penalty system and push them to be able to have a better attitude and also improve their capability to do that. Hopefully, we elevate our partner and collaborative approach towards that. Those at the left-hand bottom corner is using the stick, right, deterrent approach. Now, those people who are on top, on the right-hand top corner, we use a collaborative approach towards that. And we design our intervention for lasting impact, right? We use behavioral insight, design thinking, and data for us to help us to see where we can intervene and the behavioral place on the design thinking aspect of it. So this insight from our interview, we go around interviewing all the constituents, and they do feedback to us. For example, time-pressed employers saw hiring a safety officer as fulfilling their workplace safety and health requirement. Employing safety professionals in their workplace is not because they want to improve in their workplace environment, but rather because they're fulfilling a part of the law, which is not the intent. All right. So this is something that we're looking at. So we co-designed a behavioral intervention, and we did a randomized control trial on this and see what's the impact. And find of the 362 construction companies, we find that there are 6 times reduction in enforcement action compared to the control one. So in terms of our enforcement saving, we have some saving as well. And we also look at systemic lapse checklists, help the inspector to probe deeper root causes. So we have another program called the Program-Based Engagement Pro, right, which covers interactive approach from Intel, industry preparation, operation phase, then monitoring and custom. In other words, we don't enforce for sake of enforcement, but really we do engagement with the company in the first instance. And we just target, we call it program-based enforcement, but we have saw it and say, why don't we change it to engagement instead? So this is something we're looking at. So Vision Zero, quickly I cover why Vision Zero. Actually, Vision Zero is not about the target zero, but rather it's a mindset that all accidents that will help arising from work are preventable. It's a premise on the culture of learning from incidents. In other words, something happened, let's learn from it. It should not be fault finding, but it should be finding solution. So running out of time, I will go a bit quickly. This is some of the questions the role of labor inspector. And where I come from, I'm also from the president of this International Association of Labour Inspection, and we produce this guide together with ISA, and we use it to help inspectors to implement the approach about using Vision Zero mindset when they go for enforcement. And in this cover the few areas of the topic in this area, highlighted the 4 levels of safety, culture, and maturity, and under this 4 levels, what sort of approach you should go for inspection. And this 4-level approach, and we say that at this quadrant we do engagement, whereas the other way, when you're on the left hand quadrant we do enforcement and engagement. So in other words, inspectors now have 3 role, enforcement as well as engagement, depending on what sort of company we go for, right? So the benefits of better inspection impact, you can read through that. And in summary, Vision Zero concept and its tools are useful for labor inspector for sustainable improvement. I think this is a key word, sustainable improvement. Because when you do enforce, strict enforcement, today the inspector comes, something happens, next day they go back to the old self. So when the inspector engaging Vision Zero companies will need new capabilities. It's not something that we can just implement, right? The mindset is important. So this is, thank you for the opportunity to share, and these are some executive committee members. You see Kevin Meyer down there at the top is our immediate past president of the IRIDE, and in fact the team has benefited a lot from that. So just a passing quote, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. In other words, you are good at enforcement, you continue to enforce and enforce more, you are not going to achieve this to emphasize insane. So thank you very much for attention.